Welcome to Live, Laugh, Shut the Fuck Up, and Listen. I'm your host, Katie L. Eades, and our co-host, Marissa Senzaki.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa, and we are your strategic partners in evaluating personal and professional development trends.
Today's trend is empathy. Is empathy a vampire? What does that mean? I guess we should probably talk about what is empathy first, Marissa, before we start diving into the empathy vampire. What comes to mind when you think of an empathetic leader?
An empathetic leader. I think of someone who can put themselves in other people's shoes from a place of really thinking about how someone would think, feel, react, what that experience is like for others. But it's more than just sympathy. It's an ability to actually kind of hold that space and feel feelings along with other people. And that's just kind of a off the cuff definition, in my opinion.
Yeah. So as you talk there, I think about, well, what if I am sitting across from you and in my universe, in my head, so you have your universe in your head, what if my shoes are sociopathic? And now you're trying to put yourself in my shoes, but you can't because I don't wear shoes. And I will never wear shoes. In fact, I'm not interested in wearing shoes. What happens then?
True. As someone that's like sociopathic, I mean, I think you can understand what's made someone the way they are. But when you get into that kind of maybe dangerous territory of working with someone that feels unsafe, I choose to keep my distance as much as I can.
Fair enough. I think we all do. Where I see empathetic leaders, I see them being manipulated because they are putting themselves in someone else's shoes. And the research shows that 30% of the population are what this Dr. Christine Northrup has called energy vampires. And that means that we also have to put ourselves in the shoes of an energy vampire to see which shoes we're in. If I was, and what's interesting about that is that we always, when we're expressing empathy, we can only ever put ourselves in shoes that we've walked in. And so I might think, oh, this person is struggling because of XYZ, or perhaps they're feeling overwhelmed from this. And it's almost like empathy becomes a tool where we just stop asking people. Or maybe we do ask, and then the person we're asking, maybe they're an energy vampire, and now they know, oh, this person that cares. Okay, good. This is one of those people that I can make feel bad for me, so that I will be given a pass, or I'll be able to, get what I want, essentially. And so then I think, in a way, that those that are empathetic, and I'm putting myself in that box, I become a vampire. Of investing all this energy and all this time into something when there's other things or people that need that energy, but they don't get it. If you're a mom right now or a dad and you're at a company that's a corporate vampire, and you're empathetic to your company's plight and you want to support them, I think that when we start talking about needing empathetic leaders, we actually end up with people that can be below people that are easily manipulated. We can have people that are above people that are still getting manipulated by the people below. Have you seen that in corporate?
Well, Millie has a lot to say right now about empathy. She's not being very empathetic to what I'm trying to do here. But I think that just brings on a whole other topic of, how much empathy is needed in the workplace. But in terms of these, energy vampires, as we call it, definitely have seen that in the workplace. I've seen it in my personal life, have seen it in the workplace. And I think that's why sometimes, if you're dealing, let's say you're the empathetic person and you're dealing with someone who is not and is a little bit of an energy vampire, sometimes you risk bringing that vulnerability into the workplace because then they see your weaknesses and they use that as a way to manipulate you or target you later.
Yeah, and that brings us to so my favorite empathy vampires, like what you're talking about there is an example of the radical candor and the Kim Scott methodology. To me, that is the tech leadership edition of empathy vampire. Is, oh, this is how you support people. You have them, you build that trust. You've had someone do that. And then that person can take it and turn it around and use it against you. And pretty soon now you're being the one that's pushed out. That's happened to me a couple times. And that's where I became the empathy vampire, where I'm over here trying to save the one versus the 99. I see that sometimes in corporate where the high performers and like the people that are collaborating really well don't get the additional support they need because the empathy vampire is giving their energy to the energy vampire. And Brene Brown is a big one of those empathy vampires that we see as well, where our energy vampire that keeps you coming back because some of these tools don't work. And if we always have to talk about people's feelings and we're always talking about feelings, that's not actually empathy at all.
So we've kind of used these terms interchangeably. People talk about energy vampires. We were talking earlier today about how it's sort of tied into empathy, and that's what they're actually feeding on. How would you describe that? How would you say you've seen that manifest?
Well, I think it's important to know that at 2/3 of the population of these energy vampires are women. And women also tend to be more empathetic. And so it's one of those chicken and eggs. And when we say that this 30% of the population, they know what they're doing and they don't want to change, it's interesting. It was a hard one for me to wrap my head around. And then I remember, I'm going to start with history as my first example of where I've seen this. The Great Wall of China has been breached 3 times, but it still stands. Do you want to know why?
Why?
Because they breached it through people. They bribed the guards. So, and so we know that whether they manipulated them, whether those people were not, like, they're very individualistic. Those people don't have empathy for all the people that are about to die. They filled their pockets. And so we know these people exist. We can't be in denial. But also they leak that energy to the person they're stealing it from. And so then that empath becomes, I think the word they use now is covert narcissist, or that empath starts to show some of those same traits. For me, this is where I've also seen it in myself personally. I owned a company where the first person who taught me how to be a manager for people, because I'd only managed high school kids before that, is now in jail for putting 14 bullets into his wife. He was not a good person ever. Despite his lawyers saying, forget what he did that night, remember who he was. I do remember who he was in college. And that is how I learned to manage. And then I also had an even worse co-owner who also taught me how to manage by manipulating me in the triangulation of the business partners and the triangulation of the staff. And I had empathy because I thought he was, didn't know how to build a business and needed support. And I wanted him to live his dream of being a famous athlete. And so that was me being self-absorbed in my empathy. Empathy doesn't, my his shoes were, I don't give a shit who I step on. I'm going to go to the top. And that's where I like scarf model as empathy. I can understand where you want some certainty and some autonomy and some relatedness and some fairness. But your job is to put an oxygen mask on. There's your empathy. You've realized how you feel. How might someone else feel? Okay, great. Put an oxygen mask on. And so that what I see happening is that we use books like Nonviolent Communication or Dare to Lead, and all we do is dare to never call out an energy vampire. All we do is have no collaboration, because we should be having nonviolent collaboration and not worrying about the communication, because you can tell someone to shut the fuck up and listen, and it can be hilarious. How the F word is used shifts how we feel. But if we're using it to collaborate, well, fuck, that's a good idea, or fuck that idea, it'll never work. If we're still saying we're here for the team, we're here to collaborate, then we don't need to worry about the communication part. That takes care of itself. that's empathy. Do we have empathy for each other, like wanting to just, win a championship, whatever that is that you're competing? I think of sports teams, and then I'll stop. I'll get off my soapbox. But when I think of sports teams, like all the movies, how do we get to the end? We have music, so everybody's hearts start to get into rhythm together. We have some type of inner conflict someone goes through. We have someone's outer conflict, but ultimately the team changes their attitude, and then they collaborate together. And anyone that doesn't change their attitude in that movie sits on the sidelines and watches them win. And then maybe you come in and you're like, now that we've won a championship, we'd love for you to come play with us. But until that person hits rock bottom, like until that person is not allowed to play not nicely, it takes one bad apple. And we do see that. And that's the leaking of energy. And then other people's behaviors start to show up that are not good. And so I'm going to own, like, of course I had that. And then I went out on my own and got to carve my own path. And I realized I was a fantastic leader because that's what I did for students. I just needed to be that same leader for adults.
So I'm hearing kind of two kind of different sides to where empathy comes in. One that you've kind of touched on is maybe offering empathy in situations or to people that maybe you shouldn't have. And also this culture, especially like what we're seeing in self-help, is always like, how do we fix ourselves first? How do we fix our approach to others? Because there must be something wrong with us if it's not working with someone else. Like I don't think there's enough focus on maybe the problem is the other person, which I've had some great coaches where I was always like, this person, I can't fix this problem with my colleague. And I've asked her to meet with me so we can talk. And she refuses to meet with me. So I can't even talk to her. And my coach was like, Marissa, like, do you even think she would give you the benefit of the doubt? Or do you think she would even change or anything? And I was like, no, probably not. And she's like, exactly. It's a waste. It's a waste of your time. So I think there are these situations where we're almost weaponizing empathy in a way.
We're weaponizing words, right? You say
Yeah.
it best with word salad. What you described there is you had the attitude of, like, so even both those attitudes don't work because you have empathy, like, oh, what can I change? What can I do? But the attitude needs to be, hey, both of our attitudes don't work for collaboration. How do we want to attitude our way into collaboration? And that's where, when I look at being a professional truth teller or coaching, coaches of athletes know how to get the best out of their students. I was a tennis coach. I also had students. We get the best out of both worlds. I had kids failing PE that can pass my really hard class. Like, when I think of the opportunity to support people, that one would be, Marissa, your attitude has to shift. This person doesn't want to work with you. Also, then neither one of you ever felt comfortable saying to the other person, you don't want to work with me, do you? Or you would have to say that to her if she didn't want to work with you. She's the vampire. And even if you did, she wouldn't change. But at least she might say yes, and you could record it and take it to your boss and say, hey, I told you so. I had that scenario. I told the consultant, who then told my boss, who then let me go. I said, nobody wants to work with me. And I'm the only one here that's actually shifted the tide of the organization.
Or you have a terrible manager like I had at one job where she told me to assign tasks to the people on our team that were below me. And they didn't want to do it. So they pushed back and said no. And then it became my performance review of you were not able to get these people to work with you. And I'm like, no, I wasn't, but they refused to.
Yeah. And, the empathy part, we just have to know that 30% of people don't have it. And so what I see in my work, I get to see where they fall in these 25 strength categories. And there are people that probably falls into, I get less than 30%. I don't get a lot of these people, but I do get these people who have very low empathy. And so what I also know to be true, and this is where I wonder about the 30%, is if they move the needle forward just a little bit, meaning that they show up differently, but maybe the same problem shows up and they still come to me and they're looking at it from the wrong angle. And then we move the needle forward a little bit. But what I see is if you've spent too much time around these people, if these are the people that have trained you, if these are the people that are around you, that you'll always see in the same tunnel. And so you may not want it may be an unconscious driver, but it's still unconscious. And it's interesting on what are we supposed to do to support them? Do we get them a coach? Because that's what I did for my employee that told me she didn't respect me because I didn't work out every day and I couldn't do a muscle up. I could sign paychecks just fine. And I got her a coach and she got a new job in a few months because I was the problem. And I actually think that's fine. What's interesting is that it doesn't even matter like in that scenario. But what I do know to be true is that I went on to a new place where I was not the problem. And I don't know that we can say that's true for her. But what happens if they're a Marissa who goes from place to place and keeps finding them? And then they think, oh, I'm the problem. So I did that too. I boomeranged back right into it. And that's kind of my point. I got really lucky with the one. I had some toxic stuff, but I built the whole team. So that was just people that I found. You're a recruiter. You find good people, but you can land in places where there aren't good people.
Mm-hmm. And that goes back to the other side then, like we've talked about being an empathetic individual and how that can be weaponized against you. We also see the people who I would say, because you brought up covert narcissism, right? We see this with empathy as a tactic. So people that I would say are using performative empathy. And I think it's interesting you pointed out, you can see this in the coaching field, therapy. I definitely see it in HR.
A lot of women there too.
So I'll give you an example of how I've kind of seen this in a leadership role play out. We had kind of a new C-level person come into a company. We hadn't really met her before. We've maybe talked to her like once virtually over a meeting. She came into town to meet with the team. This was during COVID, so we all had to meet in person. And her initial exercise was something where we all had to stand up in front of one another. And granted, the team wasn't cohesive to begin with, so we didn't have that like safety to want to be vulnerable and open up. But we had to answer certain questions, and I forget, one of them was maybe like something about a difficult time or something that was pretty personal because everyone immediately went to something that changed you or a period of growth. And everyone talked about, my mom dying of cancer or, and then pretty much everyone went up and almost cried. I think I talked about when my dad died, but it kept it very surface level. And something about it felt really off. Like she was using this opportunity to create emotion in order to see where we were vulnerable and what our like weak spots were, and also to create a false sense of connection that wasn't really there. And the way that she would talk about people behind their backs, derogatory words towards people on the team, I knew she didn't really care about what struggles we had been through. That was performative. It was a tactic. It was manipulation. And that's why I kept my answer very surface level. You're going to know that I had a father who passed away. You could Google that too. I'm not going to tell you anything about how that impacted me, really.
When I think of performative, I also think of I could go around and tell sob stories to people all the time and make them feel bad for me and have them see me differently. Like those aren't the stories I share. I feel very empowered when I tell stories, and I only share a story of something if I know that it's going to be impactful for someone. Like my stories are not to get you to feel a particular way about me. My stories are actually for you to be inspired to grow and do something different. They're very one-on-one, or maybe someday I'll have a stage that's big to share them. But I think that is the reason why, like I share mine to inspire you, but asking someone to share theirs and pull that out of them in a false sense, like that's a coaching 101. In therapy, if you're taking insurance, you have to have a diagnosis in your first session. And so you've got to pull out emotions. Like how much of that, like I think of like, I'm not the same person I was in those sessions. I was just emotionally being manipulated. It's like going to Tony Robbins and feeling like you can take on the world in real estate, and then coming out like 6 months later realizing like, oh, I can't just mindset my way into $1 million. But you can really align with your heart and enjoy some synchronicity and just make flow really easy. And yeah, you can move your way into $1 million, but you're not going to mindset your way there. I think that's the energy vampire that you play on. Like there's a big rush that you get, I imagine, that he gets when he's on that stage. The self-help industry, I think all of those authors, perhaps not the one that wrote the last self-help book you'll ever need. Maybe he was trying to help people get off the train. I don't know. But they're essentially writing like Atomic Habits. That is someone writing a self-help book to keep you on the ladder of trying to be better.
Mhm.
Trying to train your brain to somehow like complete something, get somewhere. Even Simon Sinek, who I really love his work now, but that first book on finding your why, I think the reason it didn't resonate with me is because I've always known my why, because I'm alive. Like I'm a soul on fire for humanity. But sending someone to search for something that isn't like it's within you, the Tin Man, like Oz never gave the Tin Man anything that the Tin Man didn't already have. And so how you spot these people is they're trying to give you something that they think you can't get without them.
Mm. I definitely see that in the self-help arena, and then I think in the kind of corporate area, what I see is people that constantly need to take from your energy, and that's what when we're saying energy vampire, it's just kind of like they almost suck the life out of you, and that's what they thrive on, and then they come back for more. Like, I had a manager who literally he thrived on drama, and he loved to triangulate people and have drama happen on the team. And once I realized that, I use a technique they call gray rocking, where you just everything's no emotion, no, you don't react to anything, very matter of fact. And we'd go into our one-on-ones, and he's like, "So, well, like, what's going on this week? Did you hear about this? Like, what's going on with that?" And then if I didn't give in to the gossip, he would literally look at me and be like, "Are you okay?" Because he wanted to try to get some kind of negative emotion out of me, and I'd be like, "I'm doing great. I'm happy. I'm fine." One-on-one was over because he couldn't pull anything out of me.
And that's what I've seen for clients. And then I have a personal emergency and then they would disappear. I don't get very many that stay past 3 or 4 sessions. I'm much better, I think, now as well about like managing my own energy
Mhm.
in, in those scenarios. But I find that the empathy, it's such a tough one because I'm not saying we don't want empathetic leaders, but perhaps we could just write empathetic protocols into the DNA of the organization so that we don't have to read books like Nonviolent Communication and we don't have to try to sugarcoat words. It's interesting. There's a study in Tibetan monks where they're getting diabetes. Tibetan monks get diabetes and they're overweight because they sugarcoat their thoughts. And when you sugarcoat your thoughts, like it's an emotion and it has to get stored somewhere. Everybody knows the body keeps score. Everybody knows emotions are there. But if you don't allow yourself to process the anger, let's say you have an angry thought at someone, you're immediately supposed to shift. They're trained to shift that into positive feelings. Shirzad Shamin at Positive Intelligence, this is the work he's doing, which is exactly why I think it's, we did an episode on that and why I don't think it's very positive or intelligent. When you're sugarcoating your thoughts, when it gets stored, it's insulin resistant, it's getting stored as visceral fat. And Dr. Christine Northrup talks about this.
Mm.
And this is why you'll see couples where one person is really good looking and the other person is sad and overweight, as you have somebody sucking the energy and life out of them. And that is getting stored in their body in stress. We can't get REM sleep when we're in that stress as well. I like to believe there's a chicken and chicken and egg, like there's perhaps a smaller population that is allowing the wall of China to get breached, those types of people that are willing to give up everybody to make themselves rich. But I don't know that answer. What I know is that people need to be aware that this is a big chunk of the population. And as you said, therapists, coaches, teachers, women nurses, women predominantly, women industries, 2/3 of this population is going to be women already. And it makes sense if we have pedophiles becoming Catholic priests, that it would make sense that women would become places to get their energy source. And we hear similar phrases. Oh, I love my therapist. I'm going to her to 5 years. Oh, I'd never get rid of her. That's an empathy vampire and an energy vampire having a good time. It's the
Mhm.
validation station. And that's literally what Brene Brown talks about with her shame and speaking truth to it. And shame can go away there. Shame is narcissism. Why do you think Brene wrote about it so much? And I think when you like jealousy is probably how women express that a little bit differently, but it's still a shame of not being enough or not being that. And so we wish we had the other in a unhealthy way. So if we're going to preach empathy and putting ourselves in other people's shoes, we're putting ourselves in shoes that those people don't own.
Mhm.
That's why I get people in their brains. And then if the needle doesn't move forward, then when I was a teacher, I called them come to Jesus moments. Like it's a privilege to be in my class, not a right. You can't take away from everybody else here that wants to be collaborative.
So what would your advice be if someone feels that they are in some kind of relationship with an energy vampire?
Hire a professional truth teller like me to help you sort that out. And then figure out what you're going to need to pull yourself out. Because the other thing she talks about is like a year recovery. There's a lot of research on the brain and what happens as a result.
Mhm.
Um, and the reason I say someone like me is because my job is not to hang out with you for years. And so that's why people say, well, some therapists are good and some therapists are bad. Well, then to me, the entire profession doesn't work because we didn't weed them out. We just weeded them in with these credentials. If you And it's so, you wonder about testimonials. Like one of the reasons people talk about picking me is my testimonials just sounded a lot different than everyone else's. It's because my results are different. And I would hire a Marissa who truly has been there because that's someone to help validate. Brene is not wrong. You need people to help validate experiences, but Marissa also knows how to not get in those scenarios when you interview. She knows what to look for because she's worked for all of the crooks in Silicon Valley. um, And we also know that what created the problem doesn't solve it, right? And so if the brain created it, the brain can't solve it. And there's a heart in your brain, that one's a little more sophisticated. So you don't really need me. I'm going to stick to what I'm saying. You can go to the Heart Math Institute, download the attitude breathing, look up all their research, start following their videos. A heart meditation is asking about wisdom within. All these coaches, like, get your leader within. Marissa, did you have a leader within exercise that you ever did?
I don't think so, no.
So usually you give it a name and like it's an avatar and and then you ask somebody, what would your leader within say?
Mm.
When I want someone to know what their leader within says, I take them within. When the soul arrives, the heart arrives, as they say in ancient Chinese medicine. Well, the heart arrived in the body before the brain. In ancient Chinese medicine, they also say when the soul arrives, heart arrives, mind arrives, energy arrives. If you go in that order, the vampires will not get you. Your heart is aware when it walks in a room that a vampire is there.
I think some people have been gaslit so much to believe that it's
That's
them,
that's
and so I
me.
think that also
I'm
that's
one.
also the first part, right? And, as you said, like, I've had these firsthand experiences, and so, you know, I feel that I can strongly help validate people's experiences and say, like, yes, like, this is what you've experienced and what you've been through, and now from there, like, how do we build a strong sense of self so that
Yep.
these people can't permeate your energy field and take from you and break you down, um, and destroy your self-worth.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so valuable to, as you talk about being able psychological safety in the workforce is one of the platforms that you've spoken on. And that's how people can address that. And they can go to marissasenzaki.com to connect with her, Al Professional Coaching, to connect with me. Follow us on Apple and Podbean and YouTube, Outstanding Women Leaders. You get the notifications that we're going to be on again every Friday around 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. We shoot for. Marissa, last thoughts on empathy vampires.
Mm, they're dangerous.
I wish I could say
Uh,
they come out at night, but it's not.
they are there in broad daylight. They are probably shapeshifters as well, so they can, show themselves as, charismatic, loving people
Mm.
when in fact all they love is themselves and taking from other people.
I think that's important to know. If you see someone show up in a meeting where there's important people and they show up differently in meetings where there's less people and they
Mhm.
treat you differently in different environments, I mean, if you're not willing to come to reality there that you cannot work with that person because they're an energy vampire, or you can continue to work with them because you want to keep that certainty scarf on your head, come to me for disruption. I really do help. Some coach asked in a forum, like, what would a $50,000 coach look like? I've paid, like, I can't see anyone that can really out coach me, maybe a few levels above, but certainly not worth 50K. And to me, my response was, I'm that coach. And someone mentioned about some program. I'm like, no, I don't have a program for you. It's my energy. Energy works both ways. You can be a vampire when you and take energy, or you can give someone the energy they need to start disrupting their life and start moving it forward. Marissa has a very intuitive energy that she brings. I have intuition, but I bring a really disruptive energy, and disruptive in a way that provokes abundance and joy. And that's ultimately what you buy when you buy coaching. If you're looking at an online program, you're buying someone's energy as well. So I think it's a good reminder that words are energy, which is why they have all these books. And that's why I kept reading them, thinking perhaps there is something here. I do like nonviolent communication for a partner, because those are the people that we tend to get triggered the most with. But the reality is that we could just honor each other's energies and collaborate more. As Dan always reminds me, like, we're a team.
And Katie, one thing that I'd add is, your goal is to kind of shine your energy, but show others how they can then manifest the energy within themselves. So it's not this, you got to keep buying the packages, you got to keep buying the programs. We all have our own energy and we need to learn how to use that to our advantage.
Yeah. But when you're drained, you need someone's light. There's my very first website iteration had two sparklers, and I want to be that sparkler for you.
Mhm.
And Marissa can be that sparkler for you in your career too. So, great conversation today. Drop us some comments. Let us know how you felt about it. It's important to recognize that you're not always the problem. My very first coach told me, maybe you're not the problem. Maybe they're just assholes. So
Love
shut the
it.
fuck up and listen to yourself. If you are not enough and you've been told that you're not enough and it needs to be more, that is an energy vampire.